Welcome back to SNC tonight. Mark Davis with you, plowing through some issues. Let's spend some time talking about one of those overarching things that you never thought would go away. When I say the words American dream, what do you think of? It sounds very flowery, very poetic, and it is poetic. It's the kind of poetry that has been the foundation of so many American lives. People starting with virtually nothing and achieving magnificent things. A land of opportunity, a land of prosperity. What in the world happened to those things? I know they're not doing so great under Biden, but it's not like he alone made them go away in the last 3 years. Let's talk about that, maybe a couple of other things as well, with Gabriel Nadales, who is the national director of an outfit called Our America. Gabriel, welcome. Nice to have you. Welcome to SNC tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Listen, give everybody the 30 seconds on what Our America is.
Of course, Our America is an organization that's trying to unite Americans under a common identity, because a lot of times people will identify as Republican or Democrats, but then they forget that they actually have a lot more common with one another than they realize. And especially when you have like politicians and the mainstream media and legacy media trying to divide Americans on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, on the basis of just Republican versus Democrat. Americans are much more united, and we're trying to reignite that so people see themselves as Americans for our America.
Good for you. Now, it's fun. Maybe it's just what I do for a living, but I see everything through the lens of what the latest presidential candidates have been saying. There's a Vivek flavor to that. Is that okay? Which not that you're endorsing or anything like that, but one of the things, and Vivek's a whole plate full of topics, but one of the things that I rather have admired is we have more that unites us than divide us, and the problem with what the left has been doing is trying to find things to drive a wedge between us and make us hate each other, rather than, even in a time of political division, find things that should unite us. Does that sound like the flavor of Our America as well?
I think Vivek's a very interesting candidate. There's a lot of Americans out there who are already taking note the fact that we are much more united, and they're beginning to wake up to the idea that the legacy media and many politicians are trying to drive a wedge into Americans' lives, because again, we are very much united.
Well, let's spend a moment then talking about the American dream, the thing I talked about in setting it up. If I ask 100 people, you probably get 100 different answers, but usually the idea of the American dream is no matter where you start on the American ladder, you are able to climb on your own talents, and your earning potential, it will be as vast as your talents may be. The marketplace will treat you in exactly the way you seem to deserve in the job market or the education market. And it seems like that's just being battered. And it's easy to blame Joe Biden. Oh, and believe you me, I will. But I think there have been a generation, at least, of bad ideas that have put the American dream at risk. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's this article out there that was just released this week by the Wall Street Journal. It's a poll, and it said that about 36% of Americans believe that the American dream, still believe in the American dream. And let me tell you, that is just completely nonsense. In fact, earlier this month, there was a Chase survey that was published, and it said that about as many as 85% of young Gen Z and millennials believe that the American dream was still attainable. And I mean, that echoes the 2019 poll by the American Enterprise Institute that found that over 80% of Americans were optimistic about the American dream. The problem is how you define the American dream. If you define the American dream in a purely economic context, well, it's never going to be that good, or at least most of the time it's not going to be good, especially in this economy, as you've mentioned. And right now, over 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. When you define it in those terms, the American dream, it's like, is it really alive? But no, the American dream is much more than that. It is a promise of a brighter future because you have the power, you have the freedom to chart your own destiny. That's what the American dream is about.
And that's what I believe, but I'm an old guy. I wonder if indeed, and I want to be optimistic about the kind of things that you're saying, and I believe the things you're saying. But I think if you find a room full of 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, young adults, first of all, they all think the planet's going to be dead in 15 or 20 years because of my SUV and coal-fired plants. There are people not having children because of flipping climate change. This is what we're having to fight through before we even get to the notion of a long and prosperous life. But that kind of optimism based on freedom and liberty, we have young people who don't even care that much about freedom and liberty. You're a big free speech guy. There are college campuses teeming with kids who believe that certain views should be shut down if they are triggered by them. So I don't be the crotchety old pessimist, but boy, we got to work through that, don't we?
Well, yes, I think you were driving at a very important point. But remember, one of the points of Our America and the reason we started is because we see the legacy media as well as politicians. They grab that 1, 2, 10%, up to 10% of Americans that are very divisive, or those issues that are very divisive, and they try to pretend that those are like the major issues of that Americans are dealing with. But when you actually look at the data and when you talk to just common Americans, you see that there's a lot more agreement. Now we're talking about Gen Z. I have a lot of experience working with a college campuses, and I've spoken at college campuses where I've been protested, people have been kicked out. You know, I was with Andy earlier last year in January, and you know we had our speech canceled even because Antifa was showing up, and we had SWAT team, this whole thing. So there is that, and that is something we have to talk about. But that is a tiny minority of people who unfortunately have a big megaphone. That's why Our America is working to really give that megaphone to the large population, that silent majority that wants their voice to be heard, but they don't have the resources, unfortunately, to have that heard. Going back to the American Dream idea, I mean, that 2019 poll, I'll go back to the American Enterprise Institute, that Gen Z specifically, 75% of them still believe that the American dream was attainable, that they had a positive outlook on life. So even though Gen Z is definitely less willing to embrace the American dream tradition, it's still an overwhelming majority, which should be good for Americans. I mean, Americans should rejoice in the fact that our American ideals are still triumphant at the end of the day.
It should, and I think it is, and I'm lifted up by the things you're saying. I guess I might have a concern that a lot of kids, listen to me, to me, kids, anybody under 50, that a lot of young adults think that the American dream involves the promise of years and years of free stuff paid for by other people. We're in the era of college loans, that I'm paying off everybody else's college loans. That kid's American dream might be me paying off his college loan, and continuing handouts, continuing free stuff paid for by other people. Sometimes we got to remind people what the American dream should be. It's your own talents and your own self-reliance.
Yeah, and I mean, when I'm going back to that 2019 American Enterprise Institute poll, when you actually ask what American people believe the American dream is, a lot of them don't really talk about economics. Yes, that's definitely part of the American dream, but a lot of them are talking about being able to be with their families, being able to live the way that they want to live without having the government breathing down their necks. The American dream is about freedom. It isn't necessarily about free stuff or even like being wealthy. It really is about charting your own destiny and making sure that you are unrestrained by the government.
Gabriel Nadales, National Director of Our America. Pleasure to meet you, sir. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All righty. Well, in our final segment, where I try to just dig up something that's philosophically interesting to do, let's do this. Let's go back, having talked about the founding fathers a little bit this evening. One of my favorites is Ben Franklin, certainly one of the more interesting and eclectic and deep of our founders. And he had this quote, and I think it's been mangled some, but and perhaps analyzed in a different context. But it goes like this: those who would give up a little bit of liberty in order to achieve temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. You've heard that concept? I have too, and I believe it a lot. Here's what happens when that goes very, very wrong. We'll examine it next on SNC Tonight.